Um, hey everyone, I'm really happy to introduce David Tyson Smith, our representative from the 45th District. David was, as we all remember, not very long ago, elected to Kip Kendrick's open seat in the 45th last April. And today we're going to hear about that first term in office and what he thinks about for the session starting in January. David's a hometown boy. He was born and raised in Columbia, and I don't know how many of us in this group can say that. I don't, maybe a few. He went to MU and got a degree in sociology, and then he went on to law school in Tulane, and then he worked in New Orleans for a while before coming back and starting the, helping to start the law firm Smith and Parnell LLC. David also, I want to mention, since that was one of the people that helped organize the Citizens Police Review Board here in Columbia. I think David really doesn't require much more introduction than that. Thank you for being here with us, David, and we look forward to hearing from you today. Thanks.
Absolutely, and thank you for the introduction, and thanks to Muleskinners for having me. I actually wasn't born in Columbia, but I was raised here.
Oh,
so
okay.
But I saw a Wikipedia page. I think it said that too, I believe, if I remember right. So, but yeah, so I'm excited to be here. You know, and it's been an exciting 6 or 7 months as an elected official representing the 45th. You know, it's interesting, when I was sworn in, you know, I wasn't even sure when that was going to happen. People were asking me, you know, when are you going to get certified? When's this? And no one really knew. And so everything was kind of up in the air. We didn't even know when the governor was going to call a special election. And so I literally went down to Jeff City. I got a call and they said, "You're being sworn in tomorrow." I thought I had about a week. They said, you're coming tomorrow. And I went down there, I was sworn in, and I started voting immediately. And I think one of the first things I voted on was if someone's feral hogs get loose, you know, whether that should be a crime or not. So, but, you know, I felt very well prepared because I'd been researching a lot of the bills as I was campaigning. And which was interesting because even when I got down to Jeff City, I had other reps asking me, "What do you think about this? What do you think about that?" Because I had basically been in game plan or study mode the whole time because, you know, campaigning, going to forums, you have to be on top of everything. So I felt very well equipped once it was time to start voting and actually speaking on bills. You know, you know, one of the things about, you know, being in the minority down there is, you know, we don't control the calendar, meaning that the Republicans decide when the bills come off the calendar for discussion, debate, and vote. So you basically have to be ready. So you have a list and you know what the bills that are there, and they can come off at any time, but you don't really know exactly when they're coming off. So they have control in that they can get their debates ready and everything. So we have to anticipate when we think things are coming up. So we always have to be ready on all the big bills, on all big items, when to speak on them. And so we have to be very alert and be listening very attentively to find out when things are coming. We can't really stray far from our desks because they can hit the floor. We have to be ready to go. So it's a very exciting atmosphere. It requires a lot of attention, a lot of detail, and a lot of motivation, and I'm excited to do it. You know, I think we got a lot of good things done. You know, campaigning, people talk about, you know, well, you're in the super minority. What can you guys really do? But we can do a lot. And we were able to get some good things done. For example, the PDMP, prescription drug monitoring program, is a big deal. And it prevents people from hopping from pharmacy to pharmacy, fulfilling the same prescription. And we had a hand in getting that passed. So that was important. Also, you know, based on what happened, you know, a couple summers ago with the George Floyd killing, we were able to pass sweeping criminal justice reform, which I never thought. It's funny, people thought that wasn't going to happen, but it did. And it was a bipartisan effort. It was codified Senate Bills 53 and 60. It did a lot of things. And obviously it's too much for me to talk about here, but some of the things it did is it juvenile, for example, a juvenile is arrested and he's awaiting trial, or he's been certified as an adult awaiting trial before he would be housed in an adult jail. I mean, you're talking about 15, 16, 17-year-old kids in an adult jail. What if he's not guilty, right? And you don't want him around these other adults learning. So no, that's no longer the case. Juveniles will stay in juvenile facilities. We lowered the expungement times down. So now it used to be, for example, if you had a misdemeanor and you needed it expunged from your record, you had to wait 3 years after you're off of probation. Now it's only 1. And for felonies, it dropped those down as well. So people can get things expunged from their record a lot sooner. It's interesting, some of the things you would think had already been illegal, but they really weren't. For example, under this criminal justice bill, officers can no longer have sex with people they detain. And you would have thought that was already illegal, but apparently it wasn't. So those are just a few of the things. I mean, there's a lot more than that. It was huge legislation. Now, on the counter side of that, I think what went through was Senate Bill 26, which wasn't great. It sounded good. I mean, Officers' Bill of Rights, but it had a lot of horrible, horrible things in there. I mean, it had provisions that dealt with, it was okay to run somebody over if they were protesting and they're blocking traffic, which was awful. So we were able to get a lot of that stopped. A lot of that language was able to be thrown out. And it was interesting. I had been on the floor for just a few days, and someone popped up to put an amendment on Senate Bill 26, which would have required 85% incarceration time for a certain offense. And even though I had only been there a short time, I basically jumped up and inquired of him and told him I was a bad idea. And he actually listened and he withdrew the amendment. So we kept that from getting on the bill as well. But Senate Bill 26 got through. It had some problems. One of them, it affected police review boards around the state. And I heard from another colleague in St. Louis who actually patterned their review board after Columbia's review board. And he called me and said, Dave, we're having problems because of Senate Bill 26. And so I think they've had to make some changes to their review board in St. Louis. So I hadn't talked to him since, but I think it was going to cause an issue. So that's something that's been problematic. But we were able to do other things, the Wayfair fix. So what that does is if people are buying merchandise online, they will have to pay local sales tax, which is good for Columbia and our community. We passed a transportation bill, which is going to pump about $1 billion into roads for us. And it's a 2.5 cents gas tax increase. However, you can get a refund if you want. If you don't want to pay that gas tax increase, you can save your receipts or take a photo of your receipts at the end of the year. You can send them in and you can get a refund. And I think it amounts to about $30 a car, $60 a car a year. So those are good things. And it's interesting about the negotiation process, and it was somewhat eye-opening. So with the Republican caucus is really divided into 3 caucuses, and they're really not people think, well, they're marching in lockstep, but they're really not. So they're divided, and they're divided on a lot of issues, and they infight a lot about a lot of things. And so this transportation bill, when it was moving, the moderate Republicans needed the Democrats to get that passed. And so they basically came to us, I think after 9 p.m. one night and said, if you give us a transportation bill, they were going to do something to Senate Bill 26, and it cut out a lot of those provisions. And so a lot of that was negotiated. But the moderate Republicans were at war with another fraction of the Republicans about getting that passed because they didn't want any type of tax. And so the moderates went to the fraction wing, and they told them, if you don't pass and vote for this transportation bill, then we're going to kill the Second Amendment Preservation Act, right? That gun bill, which is a terrible bill, which was basically passed by kind of a wing of the party, Republican Party, which penalizes local law enforcement from working with federal authorities to deal with gun laws. It's bad legislation. Even here locally, we've seen the effects. Chief Jones even alluded to that in one of his press conferences about the fact that they can't work with the federal government and federal authorities to stop some of this gun violence. So it's a bad bill, but so the Republicans had to threaten each other, and it was interesting. They even cut off. So a lot of times what they do to the Democrats is they'll cut off debate. They they'll vote to keep you from debating a bill any longer so they can vote on it. Well, they actually did that to themselves. So one group of Republicans cut off debate on, I believe, the transportation bill to get it pushed through. And so they were storming out. One of the Republicans like stormed out late at night and was yelling. It was a circus. So we're able to get some good things done. Obviously, Medicaid expansion. We had to use the courts to get that done, but it got done. And so that's a big win for people, that they can have access to health care. And that was really long overdue. And it's unfortunate that it took so long and it was so much of a fight to get done, but it was done. So I think we got some good things done. We passed the Federal Reimbursement Act, so to fund Medicaid. And that's really, it's really ridiculous that we had to have a special session to do that, to get those Medicaid funds to help so many people. And it's really sad. I mean, it's really sad, isn't it, that we have to fight so hard to help people. And for those of you who don't know, the Republicans were trying to tie the Federal Reimbursement Act, which is basically allowing federal dollars to be used to fund Medicaid, to funding Planned Parenthood. Basically, the idea was, well, if you give money to Planned Parenthood, then you don't get like all this money that's all, millions and millions and millions of dollars, which was, it's unbelievable that they would risk so many people not getting that money. It was interesting. So I went on a freshman legislative bus tour, and we're driving all over the state. And so we're riding on the bus, and I'm listening to the Senate talk about the Federal Reimbursement Act, because they're debating it, and the House is going to come back to vote on it later in a few days. So we're riding on the bus, I'm listening to this, but we stop and visit different organizations around the state. And we visited I think it was called Pony Bird, and it was a home to help people with severe disabilities. And people were kind of locked up in wheelchairs and severe handicaps. And these people who worked there really showed these people a lot of love. They would take them to amusement parks, and they had their own rooms. So, and if they didn't have that, that was funded largely by Medicaid. And if they didn't have that, then they would be maybe in nursing homes or in hospitals, but they gave them dignity, right? They had rooms, they could play games. It was really a wonderful facility. You could just feel the love there. And I'm looking at some of the people who are just, wheelchair bound and could barely even speak, and thinking about, I can't believe this party is going to hold up Medicaid to these people, because it's going to affect them over a Planned Parenthood issue, an ideology. They're going to hijack all of this, and all this money is going to go to all these people and let all these people suffer just to prove a political point. It's really disgusting. And I talked to the workers there, and they were worried, and they said, "Hey, we don't care about politics. We just need the funding. Please, please help us. We just want the funding. We don't, So we're able to get that done. We're able to get that passed. So that's good. And hopefully that's not gonna be the case again. So that was that session. Like I said, there's a lot of other things too, but we'll be here for hours. But I think those are some of the main points, and I'm pleased of what we got accomplished based on, obviously being in the super minority status. I think the Republicans kind of fell apart there at the end, and they didn't get a lot of things through. So moving forward, what does the next session look like, and what are we anticipating? Well, one, a lot of bills are already been pre-filed, and some of the most onerous ones are the voting bills, right? These bills to restrict absentee voting, require photo IDs, and the Republican Party has realized that if everybody votes, they can't win. Okay, so this idea is now election integrity, which is to put all these extra hurdles in place to keep people from voting. And that's all that is. It's to slow down the vote, make people wait in line. As we know in Georgia, the legislation that made it a crime to give someone a bottle of water if they're voting, which is completely ridiculous. So that's something we're going to have to deal with. I personally am excited because right before this Zoom meeting, I just got a call from the House, and I'm on the elections committee. So I'm very, very, very excited about that. That was my number one committee to be on. And unfortunately, the committee assignments had already been set. I came in at a special election. Unless someone left the committee, I couldn't get on, but They're adding a few more slots. A couple more Republicans are getting on, which means another Democrat's getting on. So I'm on it. And I am really stoked about that because I want to be hands-on involved and I want to fight these awful voting bills that are coming. So I'm really excited about being a part of that. What else are we going to see? And obviously we've been reading the news, turn on the TV. A Parents' Bill of Rights has been filed, which is going to deal with a lot of educational issues, critical race theory. They're going to try the Republicans are trying to ban critical race theory from being taught, which is really, that's an illusion because it's really only taught at the graduate school level. And what that means is that they just don't want really history being taught. So this notion of critical race theory is, again, just something to get everyone all worked up and get everyone angry to get people to the polls. So that's going on. I know there's a bill that deals with preventing people from having firearms if they're under an order of protection that's been filed, or if they have even a misdemeanor domestic assault. That's something that's happening. Senator Brian Williams, who really spearheaded the criminal justice reform bill, has pre-filed another bill which would lower the cost of expungements, which is good. I'm a defense attorney and we do expungements for people and the costs are exorbitant. It's about $400 just in fees, not our fee, but just in fees for people to get an expungement, and that can be cost prohibitive. So even if you're doing it by yourself, you have to pay $400, but if you have to hire an attorney, then you've got legal fees plus that. So that's a bill that's been pre-filed. So that's good. Some other bills that are coming through. Eric Strickland, he was exonerated after being in prison for a long time. And so there's some bills filed that he will receive compensation for that. One bill said he will receive compensation retroactively. Another bill I think is, so moving forward, a person can receive compensation. One of the problems is if there's not DNA evidence exonerating someone, you really can't get fair compensation. So that's going to be worked on, and I'm going to co-sponsor those bills as well. So I'm excited about that. I think looking forward, I think it's going to be defense. We're going to have to push back on a lot of things. It's something that some things are going to affect some things going forward. Obviously, you mentioned in your announcements is redistricting. So that's on everyone's minds. Even though the House obviously is not voting on their own lines, it's still a distraction, right? Everyone's thinking about it. Everyone's talking about it. I've gone to several Democratic caucus retreats, and a large part of the discussion is we're talking about that. And people are thinking about it. I was at an event last night, and a Democratic event last night. Alice was there as well with me, and that it was talked about amongst the people there in the maps. And I'm getting emails, have you seen this map? Have you seen that map? So that's something that's going to be distracting for the legislators. I think people are going to be preoccupied not only with their own races, even though they're not voting on their own, but they're thinking about those, but also obviously congressional redistricting, which we are going to have a hand in. So, and then not only that, elections. So there's more people running now who are working in Jeff City as elected officials that are up for re-election or running for their offices than there's ever been. So everyone's running for an office down there, either running from House to state Senate or state Senate to Congress, or beyond. So we've got that we're contending with. And there's even talk that some bills, because you have people competing on committees who might be running against each other, there's some rumors that maybe some bills might get assigned to other committees that normally wouldn't go to that committee because there could be egos involved and that a bill might not get passed. So I don't know if that's going to happen, but that gives you an idea of the climate. So that's kind of where we are. That's kind of a synopsis of what we're looking at. So hopefully some of the bad legislation is going to get slowed down because of the redistricting issues, which is going to have to be dealt with, and all the elections that are going on, and people are just so busy raising money and whatnot. And I'm working on getting some bills pre-filed. So we should have something filed before session starts. One of them is I'm gonna pre-file a bill to tweak the language of Senate Bill 26 because it's affecting review boards. And so I'm going to add some language there that will not affect the way review boards operate. So I'm working on that. My plan is to file a driver's basically bill of rights to make it illegal to pull people over for minor traffic infractions. So broken tail lights, license plate lights being out, registration that's, only been expired 30, 60 days. There's no reason to pull someone over for that. So those are two things. Also, another bill I'm going to pre-file is, oftentimes public defenders, especially female public defenders, can get sexually harassed by their clients. So they're forced into representing people that harass them. And if they go to their boss or their district defender and say, hey, this guy's harassing me, he may say, sorry, there's nothing I can do about it. And they're stuck in kind of an abusive relationship with somebody that's basically abusing them. So I'm going to file a bill that states that if a woman says she's being harassed, and it could be man or woman, sexually harassed or being threatened, and she tells her supervisor, she has to be removed from that case. And then he can take the case or give it to somebody else, and then he can do an investigation. And if it looks like there's cause and this person really is just a bad fit for the public defender's office, then that issue can be taken up in front of a judge, and the judge can kind of boot that person out of the public defender system if they're abusive to the attorneys. And so those are a few things. And then there's one or two other issues, bills as well. So there you have it.
One thing I like is, David, is I very much appreciate the positive tone that you've set for what happened, because I felt very discouraged and very embarrassed to be in Missouri about some of the things that were passed, and maybe more done by by the governor and the attorney general. So it's really nice to. I really appreciate hearing that some positive things were accomplished for people.
Yes. Yeah, and the attorney general issue, I mean, he's completely out of control. I mean, he's so focused on winning a U.S. Senate race that these ridiculous publicity stunts. He's acting without legal authority. It's really beyond the pale.
David, what was the driver's bill called again? Is that what it was called?
So I think I'm going to call it the Driver's Protection Act. And it said make it illegal for law enforcement to pull people over for minor traffic infractions. But we're still, it's in drafting right now. So we're still working through that. But the plan is to have that filed by the end of the month.
I'm really glad that you're doing that. Thank you for that.
Mari, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Thank you. And thanks very much for sharing your view from the legislature, because I know it has to be a very difficult job. My question has to do with my primary interest, which is Medicaid expansion. Mm-hmm. There was a recent article published by the Missouri Independent, and I think that was also picked up by the Washington Post, contrasting Missouri's implementation with that in Oklahoma, which is an equally red state, if not more so. Mm-hmm. And the paltry number of people who have actually been signed up and approved for Medicaid expansion here in Missouri compared to Oklahoma. But a friend who knows the state budget very well told me that one of the reasons is that Oklahoma has automatically transitioned some of their special populations for which they were receiving a much lower match to the Medicaid expansion pool for which they receive a much higher match. And Missouri has not done that, which to me is taxpayer abuse. I mean, there's no reason to be paying for medical bills at 60% federal match when we could be paying at 90% federal match. So my question is, I'm not really sure who to bring this to the attention of, or how within the legislature, who provides oversight for that, and how that can be addressed in the next legislative session in the budget process.
That's a good point. And, the interesting thing about that is, Missouri has, as you know, especially with Medicaid expansion, drug its feet. It's almost as if you know, even though now it's legal and it's authorized, they're not doing anything about it. And they've kind of put the burden on the individual to get the benefits, to apply. They haven't really publicized it. So I know a lot of legislators are trying to get the word out, and I've seen a lot of I don't know if they're, we call them press releases or what, to tell people, hey, you have access to this, sign up. And you're right, people just aren't doing it because, you know, I think people are confused, they don't know what to do. But to answer to your question, it could be a couple things, right? So I think it could come from the governor's office. I would say maybe even at the budget committee level, you know, that it could be worked through. But I think people are going to have to be collaborative on that to get, you know, to make sure that most people are getting serviced. But
Right.
I think to
These
answer
are
your question,
people who are already serviced by Medicaid,
yeah,
but they're in a pool of patients that get a lower match from the federal
Right.
government. And the individual doesn't. There's nothing the individual can do about it. It just simply needs to be within the bureaucracy, transition those populations to the higher match pool.
yeah.
So
Maybe it's
more
just
of
a
an
matter for
administrative
someone
thing.
to go to the governor and say, how do we fix this? Even though it's federal dollars and a federal match, say, hey, someone probably needs to sit down with them and have a meeting and say, this is an issue. What can we do to fix this? Because here's the thing, nothing's going to be done unless you do that, because they're not interested, even though it doesn't make any sense from a financial standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Why? I mean, what's the point of that?
I think David has a question. David
Sure,
Mel.
go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I thought I was third in line behind Allison Sue.
Oh, I don't.
My question, David, is about the bill you're talking about to make it illegal to stop cars for minor infractions. I think I understand the reasoning behind it, but if the light on my license plate in the back is not lit, how will I ever find that out if someone doesn't tell me?
Well, you know what? It's funny. I remember I was driving with my kids, and my license plate light was out. I didn't even know I had a license plate light on the car. I didn't know that. And it was the nighttime, and I see that the cop pull us over, and I'm pulling over, and I don't know why I'm being pulled over. And I remember looking over my shoulder, and I'm looking at the cop and the officer and seeing like the fear in my kids' eyes as we had to be pulled over at night. And this cop is coming, and the officer is very friendly, CPD officer, very nice, very respectful. And now one thing too, they know, I've been told that it shows attorney on their little laptop in there when I get pulled over. So not to say that other people wouldn't be treated with respect, but there's that. So the officer was very nice and very respectful and said, hey, license plate light is out, didn't give me a ticket. And actually it was great. I went to one of these auto parts stores, just bought a license plate light and changed it, but I didn't even know it was there. So that's a good question. Maybe when you go in for an inspection, but I think because of the racial profiling problem we have in Columbia and we have statewide, that really isn't getting any better, right? It seems like it's getting worse and worse every year. I mean, the Attorney General reports are coming out, and it's good that we're getting the data, but it's not changing. And couple that with the violent confrontations that people are having with law enforcement, I think it's you know, something we're just going to have to give away. I mean, it's a little bit of a risk, but it's you know, kind of a pros and cons. So I think you're right. It's a con that, hey, I didn't know my license plate light was out. But I think the pro is if it cuts down on that being used as a pretextual stop to stop thousands of people around the state and all the problems that can come from that. So maybe when you go get your vehicle inspected, they'll tell you, hey, by the way, your license plate light is out. It's $2.
Yeah, hopefully that's part of the inspection process, but I think we only get our car inspected every several years. So if there's something important now, it'll make, I'm driving around without one. But I don't.
And you know, the interesting thing is about a license, not that it's not important, but I mean, can someone really not see your license plate? That little bit of license plate light is out. Is it pitch black? I mean, you've got tail lights. So I don't know that that's a serious issue. But that's, anyway. But it's a good point. That's a good point.
I think Herb has his hand up.
As a new member of the legislature, I'm going to ask you a question about a recognized problem with Missouri legislation. It is notorious nationally for being very poorly written. And there are many competing theories. One, we don't have enough lawyers in the legislature. Not everybody needs to be a lawyer, but without a certain number. A former state legislator, who will go unnamed, said there were too big a density of representatives who were each functionally illiterate. The up and downs of the central research staffs for the houses makes people laugh when they talk about Missouri. Introduced legislation especially, but frequently also the things that come to pass as law. Some things that as a fresh voice you can think of as would help this situation.
That's an excellent point. I tell you, and as a practicing attorney, that's one of the frustrations that I have is, you look at these statutes and they're difficult to read. They're difficult to figure out. I can think of probably 100, but, I think one just off the top of my head, there's a statute that says that on certain cases, it could be DWIs or whatever, a person has to do community service, but it'll say they have to do 60 days of community service. I was like, well, what does that mean? I mean, what is 60 days of community service? I understand 60 hours, but does 60 days mean 60 8-hour days? Does it mean you have to do it just 1 hour a day for 60 days? Is it 60 days in a row? And as you mentioned, it doesn't make sense. So one thing that hopefully I could do is when I actually look at the bills, I could say that this doesn't make sense, or there's something wrong with this, at least for my bills. I've had other reps have me look at bills and say, maybe more an interpretation point at that point. But I don't know what you can do about if a legislator goes down and says, I want this bill, and they draft it, and it's and plus things get beat up in committee, and the language gets changed, and things get stripped. And so I think that lends to the problem. But I don't know if it's a staffing issue. I mean, maybe have people, I don't know if they need more training. I mean, I don't know. But I do know that, plus legalese, it's hard for people to read legalese. And I think one of the problems is you don't know how things are, it's one thing to see something on paper, but then how it's, when lawyers are agonizing over it, looking at the language in your office, and you need Advil to figure out what this is. And is this too vague, or is it just me? So I think without having more attorneys, I think who practice in that area, right? And one of the problems, Herb, I think as well, is that, you've got people passing legislation for political purposes. And that, honestly, that's been one of the most eye-opening things for me, is that, not that those things didn't happen, but that, so as an attorney, we labor over these statutes, right? Or whatever, you may be working for an agency in the state, for whatever, it's not just attorneys, but you look at these statutes, you're trying to figure them out, you go to the statute, if you're in trial, you're trying to figure out the elements of it. And you think it's all very serious, but then when you get down there and see that people just like pop up and throw an amendment on, it's for whatever reason. And, it's like, it's so quick and easy up there to make these bills, right? You just have an idea and they put it together. Just quick and easy, and then they just get filed. And so it's kind of scary, really. And it's scary if someone that's not in that field. I don't have a problem with a legislator who might work in education, or, there's a lot of from the medical community. I think that's great, who kind of has an understanding of their area and they're filing bills. Those really, I think, I would assume would be better. But it's people who don't really have an expertise in that particular area, and they're just doing it because their base wants it, and they're just filing all these bills that are really ridiculous, like the Second Amendment Preservation Act. I believe in the Second Amendment. I think people should have the right to bear arms. There are people who live in rural communities that where I live in my neighborhood, there's a police substation right around the corner. So if something happened, hopefully there'd be an officer there. But there are people who live way out in the middle in the sticks, and you call the police and it might be an hour and a half, and they need firearms. I really believe that, to protect their homes. But then you've got legislation like the Second Amendment Preservation Act, which goes so far beyond the pale and is so ridiculous, and then hurts local law enforcement agencies from even doing their job because it's politically driven and makes everybody kind of rah, rah, rah and shake their fists, and we're going to stand up for our rights and freedom. And you know what's scary? This was really kind of creepy to me. When the Second Amendment Preservation Act passed on the floor, you had like various individuals kind of randomly yelling out freedom. Are they legislators? Are they staff? It was just bizarre. Like, this is supposed to be the legislature, and people are yelling, shouting phrases out like that after it passed. We're in strange times.
David, you could call on somebody.
Oh, sorry.
Whoever. I mean, Mr. Miller. I only see. I don't know if I see everybody.
Well, thank you. First, I would like to offer a suggestion. I do have a question, but I'll offer the suggestion first. Relative to the issue of people being pulled over for minor traffic violations, how about something like a warning summons being sent to people by mail?
Right.
And they could be given a certain amount of time, 15 days, 30 days, whatever, to have a tail light repaired, or a license plate light repaired, things of that sort. It seems that would be far better than pulling people over with lights flashing and attention grabbing, and as you say, frightening perhaps to children and to others. So that's my suggestion.
That's a good idea, because I've thought about that and some of the nuances, because if people say, what if you don't know, or should people just get a free pass indefinitely? But that might be something that's workable. So maybe they capture your license, they send you something, and then it's in their system that it's been sent, assuming they have your address.
Yes.
And then 60 days goes by and they happen to see you again. Maybe they can run the plate and see that you still haven't done it. Then maybe a stop. That's interesting. Yeah. That way they've at least been given a chance, so they can't just be out there, driving around with broken taillights all the time.
Exactly. Sure. Yes. Well, and here's my question. I too appreciate your optimistic orientation to the state legislature. I believe I heard you allude to the observation that there are some Republicans in the legislature who might be able to listen to reason. I had not heard that before, and I certainly had had no opportunity to observe it. To what extent does that exist, and how might we take advantage of it?
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely think it exists. I think there's a lot of people, and sometimes, on the Democratic aisle, I was told, they're called friendlies, right? Like this is a list of the friendlies, the people that you can talk to, that you can trust, that are going to listen. I believe that, and I know I was even reading today that some of my colleagues had talked to some of the Republican colleagues about the Strickland bill to allow compensation for people who've been wrongfully incarcerated. So you really have to do that. I mean, you have to find people that are reasonable. I mean, so a couple things. I mean, one, you have to find someone you can trust, because what you don't want to have happen is and I've seen this happen, where a Democrat works with a Republican, they get together in their office, they craft language, and then when it comes on the floor, the Republican acts like they never talked, and they oppose it. And I've seen fighting, like, wait a minute, you told me 2 weeks ago that we were going to do this, and now it's a different story. So you have the trust issue. Can you trust somebody? But there's also Republicans that'll be just shoot straight. They'll say, hey, I'd like to do this, but I'm going to get primaried if I do it. You're right, but I'm going to get primaried. And so I appreciate that. Whether I I appreciate the honesty that they want to do something, but they can't. I obviously want action, not words, but I appreciate that. And I think that's at least a good start so you know where they're at. But there's other Republicans I think that are open to change and will sit down with you and work with you, because there has to be, and it's about building relationships. And I try to do that as well. During the off session here, I just recently had lunch with a Republican, and we lunch across the street from my office. It was a great time, and we've been kind of messaging each other. And he's got a lot of experience, and I feel like he's a trustworthy person. So that's what it takes. I had one of my colleagues say, "Hey, Dave, I spend time over here on the other side of the aisle talking to different people, just to get to know them and build relationships." And I think you can't really be caustic, okay? Because I think there's some reps that are very caustic and insulting, and if something's not going their way. And I think it's hard to work together. And we know that from life in general, right? I mean, you try to work with in any profession, any field. If you yell at them and call them names, then it's going to be difficult to get things done, as opposed to trying to work with them, trying to reach common ground. And some people you're not going to, and we all know that. Some people, that's just never going to happen. But I think most people tend to be fair. I mean, I found them to be fairly reasonable. I think you have these fringes, but I think most people are I think most Republicans are fairly moderate, but I think there's people are driven by fear. I think everyone's afraid. And here's something else that I noticed right away that took me, I wouldn't say completely by surprise. It's just the mechanism for voting. So, when you're down there, there's a big voting board up for, you've been down to the Capitol, and it's got, everyone's listed alphabetically, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. But it's very difficult to see where someone's vote is. And if someone strays from the pack, from the floor looking up at the big boards, it's difficult to see. So if you go down there and you're on the side gallery or in the top gallery and you're looking at the board, you kind of got to strain to see how everyone's voting. And people could be voting any kind of way. But for legislators, and we have these laptops, and they have it, and so they turn on, they open the board, and your laptop turns on, and it'll have the Democrats on one side, the Republicans on another side. It's a seating chart. And so if you vote yes, it lights up bright green. And if you vote no, it lights up red. So, but the way it is you can see very clearly how everyone's voting. And if a Republican votes a different way from his party, I mean, you can see it from 50 feet away. I mean, if it's all field of green and one red, it's like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And I think there's a lot of peer pressure. And I noticed and felt that voting initially is that, wait a minute, I might not like something, but it's a little more difficult to vote against your party because everyone's going to know, hey, why'd you vote this way? And I think that's one of the problems that kind of creates this. Sometimes everyone voting along party lines is, if people really aren't informed about some of the issues, they just kind of vote the way everyone else does because their party is voting one way and they just press the button so they don't stand out. And if you do vote another way, people are going to ask you. I mean, I had a situation where there was a bill up and all the Democrats were voting one way on it. But I was reading through it, and then there's something in it that said that if somebody was in foster care and a parent was behind in child support, that was grounds for terminating their parents' parental rights. And I didn't think that was right. I just didn't think that was fair. And so I voted against it. And someone on my left said, Dave, why'd you vote against that? And I said, because of this provision. And they said, oh, yeah, and they voted against it. So same thing. Why'd you vote against it? So can you know, Dave, why are you voting against this? And so like 7 people changed their votes. So it's sometimes difficult to be that initial person. I think that's some of the problems that we have, why everyone is so locked in. They just kind of vote with everyone else because they don't want to be asked questions.
Scott, or you had your hand up.
On the driver's stop bill, David,
Yes.
I'm assuming that is a way to prohibit cops from stopping while driving while black. Is that the basic reason for it?
But yeah, I mean, possibly. But even if you're white, you should be harassed, right? So I think we do have racial profiling issues. That's part of it. And all the violent encounters with law enforcement. I just don't think we need to be constantly pulling people over. It's not necessarily driving while black, but obviously with the racial profiling data, people are being harassed, but it's not limited to that. I mean, I think, the point is, cops shouldn't be pulling people over all the time, a broken taillight, and then you get into some weird altercation with them. So yeah, I think, it's part of that, but that's not the only reason.
Of course, one of the main reasons the traffic stops used to be made, I'm not sure, I don't know the general pulse now, but there's obviously a real good reason. You heard a lot of complaints to offer a bill like that, but it used to be that, of course, everybody usually knows in order to stop any vehicle, you have to have probable cause of a violation in order to stop them. You can't just randomly stop vehicles unless it's a planned DWI, 2-hour something. There are exceptions, but there have been an awful lot of vehicles that have been stopped for minor infractions, which have discovered warrants issued for somebody.
Yes.
And you and I can both quote case after case after case of dire criminals caught on random traffic stops where they just went 10 miles over the speed limit or something. And I would hesitate to just pass a blanket bill where you couldn't stop anybody for minor infractions, because there really are some cases, the Amber Alerts, things of that nature that and I don't know what my numbers are. I don't know what facts are. I'm sure you have a portfolio of the facts, but once you do a blanket thing where police cannot stop anybody for any minor infraction, you all of a sudden do like the Columbia police are doing now, where the police chief says, we don't have the manpower to stop people for traffic infractions. And as a result, there are more people passing me at 50 miles an hour and 60 miles an hour going down Forum Boulevard, on 30-mile-an-hour streets, because they know the police aren't going to arrest them. I think that's a bad idea. The police chief oughtn't to say that. He oughtn't to ever say we're not going to do it.
Right.
But I just caution you to be sure to see what the broad consensus is on that before you expend too much valuable political capital on something that really may not. Now, if driving while black is that big a deal, and there are many road cops out there just stopping every black person they can, well, that ought to be addressed.
Yeah.
But I just don't know the facts. But I throw that out there that there's a real good reason to stop some of those cars. And furthermore, my wife got stopped at a routine traffic stop, and the police discovered her license was going to come due, her driver's license, in 1 month. She didn't know that, and I missed it. And it would have caused a real hardship because we're out of town during that period of time. So that was one we were just delighted she got stopped.
Absolutely. That's
just for a global look at an issue with other issues other than, Bill Clark got real upset because an officer stopped him for failure at a stop sign to put his turn signal on to make a turn onto a thoroughway. It was one of the technical stop like you did. He got real upset, and the officer was training another officer on how to stop. He wrote not a violent, but a diatribe in the Tribune, which caused him to get fired. So his column no longer appeared. And I felt very badly about that, but he was in the wrong. He should have signaled. I get so upset when I'm driving and people don't signal when they're changing lanes.
Right.
So that's all I need to say. There are a lot more important issues to talk about. And thank you for the good job you're doing and for the thoroughness you're doing it and for your attempts to cross the party lines, because there are a lot of major issues which most reasonable people will agree on. But this violent Republican vendetta is just abhorrent, and I don't know where it's going to stop statewide, nationally, or anything else. And I applaud everybody for being reasonable like you're so doing. Thank you for your service.
Oh, well, thank you. And that's an excellent point. I appreciate that about looking at all those issues, because you're right. I mean, sometimes they can pull someone over and the person could have, a backseat full of guns and drugs, right? Or, they could be kidnapping somebody. So I definitely think we have to look at that, because you don't want to, I think it's a balance, right? Because you don't want to, on one hand, cut down on inappropriate stops, on the other hand, let serious criminals off the hook. I definitely think people should be pulled over for speeding though. People shouldn't be doing like 20 over. That's because that's dangerous. So.
Let's see, Olivia and then Carl.
Hi, David. My name is Olivia. I'm a reporter for the Columbia Missourian. So I just had, I guess, like a few clarifying questions, if you wouldn't mind answering. So I know, I mean, a big thing that we've been talking about in our newsroom and a lot with Columbia Public Schools has been about critical race theory and the other education bills. So would you just mind elaborating on some of that and what you're going to be talking about?
So, I talked to the school board a few weeks ago about this. Politics in many ways has always been local, but in many cases now it's national. And so what's happening at a national level is there is a playbook that says attack your local school board because it's good politics. It gets people angry, it gets people upset, and people vote. And so I think when we saw the race out in Virginia, where one of the candidates said, he said something about, I don't know, something about parents don't matter, which is a terrible thing to say, or we don't need to listen to parents. That was awful. And so, and then it affected the outcome of the race there. So, but there is a strategy on a national level to go after school boards. And so we see it here locally. So this idea, and it's not just here, it seems personal because we're seeing it on our local news or reading it in the Missouri and the Tribune, but this is something that's going on everywhere. And the idea is one, the critical race theory piece. So it's really an illusion. And you go in and you say, the school is teaching everyone your kids to be racist. It's, first of all, critical race theory itself is really a graduate level program. It's really not taught in K through 12. Now there are about 3 school districts, it's not here in Columbia, that teach a form of like the 1619 project. And I think they're out in, one's in, I think the Kansas City area. We're actually talking about this recently in the caucus event. So, but it's not being taught fundamentally in Columbia, but the idea is to pretend that it is so that people get angry, right? I mean, one thing I agree on is I don't think people, one of the concepts of critical race theory at the graduate level is it can group people into one, it talks about systems of racism, okay? So if you talk about legal segregation, that was a legal system, but I think it's fair to call that racist, right? Some people don't like that, but I think it's okay to call certain institutions racist. Slavery was based on race. And I think it's okay to say, hey, that's racist. That could be part of critical race theory, but I think that's okay. It's okay to say those institutions are based on race, or if they've, in St. Louis, they had the Del Mar Divide, where years ago they, it was segregated, blacks on one side, whites on the other, and you still see the effects of that today in that area. And I think that's okay to talk about. Now, some things I'm not okay with, and that's if you label people as oppressors or oppressed by race. I don't think it's fair to tell kids, white kids, hey, you're white, you're an oppressor. Or because you're white, or if you're black, hey, you're oppressed just because you're black. And I don't think that should be taught because I think it'd be stigmatizing. I certainly wouldn't tell my children, hey, by the way, you're oppressed. I wouldn't do that. And I don't think white children should be taught, hey, you're oppressor. So that's something that can be an element of that, but it's not happening here. But that's something that I agree that, hey, that shouldn't be taught in schools as far as grade schools. So just to answer your question, I think this is part of a national strategy to win votes. And unfortunately, the school board has become the punching bag for it. And they've endured tons of abuse, unfair abuse, just so people can win elections. And it's based on a lot of misinformation and I hate to say this, lies. So.
Let's see. Who else has their hand up here? Oh, Carl.
Carl.
Yeah, thank you, David. I appreciate it. And it goes with us. Thank you for being here at this forum, but also thank you for representing Columbia in the state legislature. I mean, it's rare, and not to cast aspersions on anybody else, but to bring your intellect and thoughtfulness to some of the issues that are going on a state level is it's kind of relieving in a way for me. But let me talk about 2 particular issues. Go back to one that supposedly is not one of the big issues, but it seems to be at this forum, and that is traffic stops. And I know Wiley talked about
talked about sending a mail a notice, and that's a good idea. I was thinking also about community service officers. We're understaffed both with police officers and community service officers, and I'm not sure the extent to which they have the authority to do this. But let me tell you about my experience in a couple of ride-alongs. And that was affected by the fact that I'm on the city council and I was in a police car, and the police officer knew this. But we were staked out, if you will, at a place where it was likely that people were either going to run stop signs or cruising neighborhoods that were looking for expired license plates or something, some defect in the car. I think that was that is a mistake, and I think that ought to be handled by somebody else, regardless of which of those recommendations you may want to consider. But I think that there is an effort to do that, and I think that has driven up some of the confrontations that have occurred with people and the police department. And one other issue, and you can comment on that, one other issue has to do with obviously the Police Review Board. I was there at the inception of the Police Review Board, as you were as well, 2007, I think. 2009, when this was established, I felt very strongly about it. And frankly, we hired a police chief who said he was willing to go along with the whole idea of a police review board, but I have my druthers about whether that happened or not. The old police chief. But nonetheless, I mean, you came to testify before City Council and gave a presentation that I think was very worthy. We decided to take the advice of the city attorney, if you will, and not die on this hill, comply with state law, and then change policy later to restore the authority of the Citizens Police Review Board, which I'm in favor of. That was a unanimous decision. That's all I wanted to say about that, and I'd be happy to entertain any comments you have about how that went down and what you think about that whole process.
Yeah, thank you. And Carl, thank you for your work as a public servant. And I appreciate you, and I know that you work hard, and you guys take a lot of abuse as well. It's not limited to school board, that's for sure. And so I appreciate all you do. And actually, you know, I have, as an elected official, I've seen greater appreciation for you and the work that you do, because, you know, sometimes we're all in difficult places. You know, one about the stop issue, I don't like that either, about, you know, just going to a certain neighborhood and say, hey, we're going to look for people with expired tags because they're going to be in that neighborhood. That just feels funny. You know, it's funny, when I was in law school, we had to do, I think, different service projects. We had to do various things, and you know, before we graduated. And I think one of the law students, I don't know if it had to do with that issue or something else, but he did a ride along, and I'm pretty sure he told me this. He said that the officer told him, okay, today we're pulling over black men on bikes day. And he was like, what? You know, but that's kind of what they did. They're going to pull over every black person they find on a bike. And that's, you know, Louisiana, but that's what was going on. So yeah, I don't like when they target certain areas looking for certain things. I agree with you. Yeah, as far as the review board, yeah, we, and I appreciate your service on the board. And I think you're the only member of the council now that was there originally to vote for it, right? Yeah, absolutely. So I appreciate that, Carl. You know, when we fought for the review board years ago, it passed unanimously, and Carl was on the board, and he was a friend and helped create the board, and, you know, voted for it. So I'm appreciative of that, and he was one of the ones that helped establish it by his vote. So yeah, I came and spoke with the city council because of the problems with Senate Bill 26 were creating, and it was creating a conflict. You know, for example, Senate Bill 26 says you can only be investigated by 2 officers. Well, that creates a problem for a police review board, because then they can't interview an officer, right? Because they've already had those 2 interviews are probably going to be used up by the police. So if someone's being investigated, the police interview the person twice. Before this, you can then go to the review board and an officer can be questioned. Now, under Senate Bill 26, that can't happen. So one of the problems with Senate Bill 26, and I mentioned this before, as I was on the floor when that was debated, it never came about review boards. There's no language. There's not really any language in that Senate Bill 26 that affects review boards. And so the question is, was that the intention of it? However, there is an existing review board statute that's already in effect. And this is what I talked with the council about. And so there is a review board statute that says you can do these things, that review boards have the power to investigate, and they have the power to recommend discipline. So you basically have 2 competing statutes, right? You have this new SB 26 bill, and I don't have the statute number in front of me, but you have the new statute, but you have an existing review board statute. And so my position is, and that's still my position, is that what I presented was a council should have let the courts handle that, because the two statutes were at odds. I didn't feel that Senate Bill 26 was up here, the other review board statute was here. I felt like they were they're at the same level as far as discretion wise and where to go. So the council was in a bind because they had two competing statutes. And my position was, let the courts hammer that out. Now, the remedy, if you can get sued if you don't, if you get sued for not following Senate Bill 26, but I think the remedy is attorney fees. And so my position was, and it still is that the council should have, stuck to their guns. If they weren't going to get sued by the police, you let them get sued. Worst case scenario, there's attorney fees, but let the courts decide it. And I know the city councilor recommended or implied that, Senate Bill 26 governed, and I disagree with that. And that's, as attorneys, we do that all the time. And so I know the council voted unanimously to go the other way. Took a punt.
I appreciate the decision, and I agree with you absolutely. SB 26 is a bad bill. We just have this effect of preempting, and that's what we acted upon. So.
But I will say that Pat Fowler did apologize to the review board for her vote, because the council unanimously voted to amend the ordinance, but I think Pat Fowler went to the review board and apologized for doing that. So. But I do realize it's a kind of a sticky wicket, as they say, and it's a difficult position to be.
David, I wanted to switch a little bit and talk about the American Rescue Plan and the difficulty of doing an appropriation. Read an article about all this money that's supposed to go to schools, and most of it's spent locally, which means you need to have the schools enough time to get the money to spend it by the deadlines. Does that mean the appropriations are the entire budget bill, or can it be separate appropriations for the American Rescue funds? Because we have to get those funds out to be spent, blah, blah,
Yeah, and that's a problem that I think that this legislature has time and time again, is it's like there's money, but getting it where it needs to be. And there's one appropriations bill I think has to be done by March. So
March 24th.
Right. So we're time. I mean, that's going to be an issue that coming right in, we're going to have to deal with. But there's other COVID money, and I don't know I think it can be separate appropriation bills. I would assume are votes. Hopefully, it wouldn't have to be all together. But there's a lot of COVID money there, a lot of money, and I'm disappointed that people have trouble accessing it. I mean, so yeah.
Okay, just wanted to raise that. Thank you. Scott, do you still have a question before we sign off, or?
I'm sorry, I didn't realize my hand was still up there. I apologize. No more questions. Thanks to Carl and David, and thanks to all of the officers of the Muleskinner who have volunteered to step up and do that next year. I appreciate all of us who never do anything except just enjoy it. Thank you all.
David, did you want to say something, or?
No, I just want to thank you for having me, and I appreciate you guys and all the hard work you do, and get Carl on the board and everyone. I think at the end of the day, we're all in the same fight, and we're trying to do the right thing. And I believe if we fight and we show up and we do what we have to do, we can make a change. And I wouldn't be doing this. I wouldn't have run if I thought we couldn't make a difference. And so I'm excited about the future. I'm excited about Boone County. I'm excited statewide. I feel good about what's coming. And I know it can look kind of bad and rainy out there, but if we stick to our guns and don't give up, Nelson Mandela said some things seem impossible until they're done. So that's just kind of what we have to keep in mind. So I appreciate you guys.
Thank you for speaking to us, and thank you for your service.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hi, David. Thank you.
I refer you to the chat, David. There's lots of compliments.
Oh, thank you. I'll check it out. Thanks, guys.
Great.